Welcome back, guys. The game that I'm about to show you today is from round 4 of the Grenke Chess Classic. It's the game between Paco Vallejo and Viswanathan Anand. So heading into this round, Paco was on -1, Anand was on +1. Paco had white pieces in this game, so without further ado, let's get started. So Paco opens the game with e4. Anand plays c6 to Caro-Kann defense. Paco decides not to go for the main line d4, he instead plays knight to c3. Anand pushes d5, knight to f3, bishop g4, h3. Anand resolves the tension, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, e6, so white could try to gain more space with the move d4, but Paco plays the move g3, going for a King's Indian attack structure. Anand plays knight to f6 and a3 from Paco. A strange move, perhaps an attempt to confuse Anand. Anand plays bishop to c5. We have pawn to d3, Anand castle. And here a move like b4 is met with bishop to d4, and after bishop to b2, black goes a5 with a good position. So here Paco continued his development, bishop g2, knight b to d7, Paco castle, and b5 is the novelty from Anand. So Anand starts his queenside expansion, queen to d1, preparing to push the f-pawn, and you might be thinking, why not queen to e2? So my guess is that here Anand would go queen to c7, looking at this pawn on g3 because the pawn on f2 is pinned. And after king h2, black goes d4 and the knight is forced to a bad square, for example, knight b1. So if black were to push d4 immediately, this wouldn't work because white can go e5, the queen is not controlling the e5 square. So after something like pawn takes c3, e takes f6, knight takes f6, b takes c3, white is definitely fine, and bishop on g2 is especially strong in this position. And on knight d5, white simply goes knight to e4, where knight takes e5 isn't possible because of knight takes c5. So back to the game, Paco played queen to d1, Anand played queen to b6. So here queen to c7 is met with the move d4, and eventually e5, white has a space advantage. So queen b6 from Anand. Anand has made it difficult for white to unpin the f-pawn since it is now attacked twice by the bishop and queen, and this pawn on b5 takes away the option for white to go knight to a4. So how does white deal with this pin? So it could be possible to play a move like e takes d5, play knight e2 and d4 on the next move, but it does give up the e4 square. So I should mention that knight e2 immediately fails to the move d takes e4. So now white can't go d4, and after a5 the bishop remains on the strong diagonal. So another interesting try is to go rook to b1, and the idea is to go simply b4, where bishop d4 would not be pinning the knight. In the game, Paco played queen to e2, so he uses another tempo to defend f2 in order to unpin his pawn. Anand played a5. Paco continued with king to h1. So another alternative is to go e5. This prevents black from locking down the center with e5 himself, gives the bishop on g2 a bit more scope, and in some cases, the white knight could find himself on the e4 square. But Paco continues with his plan of king to h1, going for this plan of pushing f4, and Anand pushes d4, which forces the knight back, and e5, locking down the center, which is a logical decision. because white has 2 bishops. So now knight d2, bishop d6, f4. Paco goes for what appears to be the most logical plan. Queen c7, and I think Anand underestimated Paco's kingside initiative. So Anand wants to support the c-pawn, but after the move f5, things start to look quite dangerous for black. g4 and g5 is the threat. Now, if black tries bishop e7, after g4, knight to e8, black momentarily defends the g5 square with his bishop, but after the simple knight f3, this seems rather unpleasant. So in the game, Anand tried knight to b6. g4 from Paco, we have to move c5, and knight to f3. So a peculiar decision. Paco maybe should have played g5 right away, and after knight fd7, queen to h5, keeping the initiative going. And this knight could potentially reroute to the g4 square, maybe even to g5, but instead Paco played knight f3. Anand pushed c4, and here another mistake from Paco. He played bishop to g5. So instead a move like knight h2 would have been a much better decision, keeping the option of g5 alive. If g5, immediately this would run into knight h5. So knight h2 was definitely a move to consider, but Paco played bishop g5. Knight f to d7, and now f6. So going for some sort of attack on the dark squares, but Anand isn't too worried. Here he plays g6. Bishop comes to h6, rook f to c8. And now knight g5 is another mistake, because this allows Anand to consolidate his position. Instead, queen f2 would have been a better idea to meet bishop f8 with the move queen h4. So on knight takes f6, I don't really know what's going on exactly, but it seems dangerous to open up the f-file. In the game, we see the move knight to g5. Anand plays bishop to f8, trying to consolidate. Queen to e1, so white wants to go queen h4, but this idea is a little too late. Anand simply played knight b to d7, and now queen to h4 is met with rook a6. And if queen h6, rook takes f6 diffuses some of that pressure. So Paco tried a4, that was taken. b4 is also a decent continuation, and this looks objectively lost for Paco, because black will play rook a6, he will play pawn takes d3 and try to infiltrate down the c-file. Looks very promising for Anand. In the game we see b takes a4, rook takes a4, pawn takes d3, c takes d3, h6, very solid from Anand, just kicking away the knight. And now knight jumps into e6. Anand finds a beautiful square for his knight, with a potential outpost on f4 as well. So he's not even concerned about winning f6. Paco goes queen to h4. So king h7 defending h6, g5, h5, locking down the king side, and black's king is completely safe, and his activity on the queen side gives him the advantage. Paco played rook a to a1. Rook a3 might have offered a bit more resistance, but still a very difficult position for white. This knight is coming to f4, the rook is coming to b8. Looks very difficult for Paco. So back to the game, rook a to a1, queen c2 from Anand, rook f2, and simply queen takes d3, grabbing a pawn, and now black has a passed pawn of his own. Paco played bishop f1, queen to b3. We have knight to d2, and here queen takes b2 is completely fine. Maybe Anand didn't want to allow rook to b1, although after queen c2, rook b7, queen c6, and black is still completely winning. In the game, Anand played the move queen to b4, very disciplined technique, not allowing any form of counterplay, and bishop to e2 here. So desperation from white, offering a piece for the attack, but Anand has worked out that this is going to be good for him. So he plays queen takes d2, bishop takes h5, queen takes g5, now bishop takes g6 is forced to continue the attack, king takes g6 is forced, rook to g2, winning the queen, but after queen takes g2, king takes g2, black has a rook and 2 knights for the queen, which is definitely more than enough material. So now we have a few consolidating moves from Anand. King d6, so that defends the pinned knight. Rook a to b8, queen c4, king to e7, and in this position, Paco resigned the game. So Paco did have some chances in this game, but a few inaccuracies allowed Anand to defuse the kingside pressure, and black's queenside pressure proved to be decisive. After this win, Anand joins Magnus Carlsen in the lead with 3 out of 4 points. Carlsen drew his game with Caruana. Svidler lost his game to Aronian, so that puts him on 2.5 out of 4. That is all for this video. I hope you enjoyed the game. Thanks for watching and have a great day.